Good morning. My name is Deborah Cohen. I am a history professor here at Northwestern and the director of the Roberta Buffett Institute for Global Affairs. This event, which I'm so pleased to have a chance to welcome you to, The Peace We Make, came about when a group of our students approached us as we were planning last quarter's spring symposium about peace negotiations, to ask if the Buffett Institute might be interested in doing something about student-led, youth-led peace building. And we thought, yes, this is a perfect idea. And we are just all so grateful to the extraordinary energy and determination of our organizing committee, as well as the arrangements committee. And I know a number of you are here today. You'll see everyone's names in your program on page 3, but if I could have the students who've been involved in planning today's work to stand up so we can give them a round of applause. I want to offer a few other thanks as well. First of all, to our undergraduate program team at the Buffett, Dr. Samantha Nissen and Grace Lewis, who have helped and worked with the students to plan today's event, to our comms team, led by May Malone, with Mimi Sang and Skylar Clark, their graduate assistant, who do so many incredible events at the Buffett, which I know from looking around the audience, I know a number of you have already been and witnessed these. And Madeline Williamson, who has helped make travel arrangements and get everyone organized, and Megan Ozorowski, the director of our global collaboration team, who's worked with a number of people on their visas. Right now, what I want to do is turn over the program to our two students who are going to introduce the day's events. That is Giavanna Chopra and Liana Ioannides. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here, and we're really looking forward to it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Giavanna Chopra, and I had the privilege of being one of the student organizers of this event. I want to echo Director Cohen's tremendous gratitude for the Roberta Buffett Institute, our amazing staff, and the wonderful students I've gotten to know over the last several quarters. I hope that we will have a meaningful dialogue, exchanging ideas, and learning from our inspiring speakers. Thank you all for your curiosity that led you to join us today and your desire to participate in new or ongoing conversations about peace. Fundamental to encouraging peace is the expansion of community. If you have not already done so, I encourage you to introduce yourself to those around you. Today's breaks will offer opportunities to caffeinate and collaborate with fellow peace builders in the room. Some participants join us as academics, some as students, elected leaders, or social advocates. Some join us online from around the world. I welcome each and every one of you and believe that we are part of a shared community seeking peaceful solutions to very long-going and diverse conflicts. We invite you to participate in our conversations by asking questions during our panels, engaging during lunchtime discussion groups, and approaching our speakers, student organizing team, and all of the amazing peace builders in the room here today. There may be many different motivations for attending, but whatever conflict concern brought you here today, let lived experiences and empathy guide our pursuits. Peacemakers must acknowledge the atrocities of the past, the complicated impact upon the now, and propose solutions for the future. Together, we seek reasoned, practical, and compassionate advocacy. Single voices are impactful, but many voices are stronger. The adage that many hands make light work highlights the goal of our symposium, to individually contribute so that the collective responsibility of peacemaking is shared. Our keynote speaker today, Nobel Prize recipient Nadia Murad, has famously shared her goal of being the last girl with a story like mine, and has been a steadfast advocate for peacemaking and anti-violence. Today, we are honored to learn from her experiences and those of our other amazing speakers and join them in elevating awareness of sustainable peacemaking practices. Our esteemed guests give voice to victims of genocide, empowering community-driven and survivor-centered solutions. Ms. Murad is a courageous human rights advocate whose global work through Nadia's initiative empowers survivors of sexual violence and advances justice, gender equity, and community resilience with compassion and determination. I hope that we are inspired by our speakers today, who will graciously share their experiences and insights on peace building to incorporate compassion into our conversations and our ongoing advocacy. Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to welcome our next student speaker.
Hello everyone, my name is Liana Ioannides and I come from Cyprus. I feel honored to be welcoming you to the Youth and Peacebuilding Symposium. I would like to begin by thanking the Roberta Buffett Institute and its staff for believing from the beginning in the idea of a Youth and Peacebuilding Symposium when students first proposed it a year ago, and also for trusting students with conceptualizing and co-organizing it. To my friends, collaborators, and fellow members of the student organizing group, Aizam, Alexander, Dasha, Giavanna, Garo, Natalia, Nadia, Sama, Sarah, and Victoria. Thank you for making this symposium a reality. I would like to share some history from my father's beloved and occupied hometown in Cyprus, Morphou, which is known as the citrus town of Cyprus. In 1974, during the Turkish invasion, there were some Greek Cypriot troops that were stuck in already occupied Morphou. They hid in the orange groves that had been planted over decades by men like my grandfather. Had the Turkish soldiers discovered them, they would have been shot and dumped in unmarked mass graves dug among the roots of orange trees. However, a Turkish Cypriot friend brought food and took care of them. Had someone found out that he, a Turkish Cypriot, was helping Greek Cypriot soldiers, he would have been the one shot and dumped in an unmarked grave. As wars rage around the world, we see the perpetrators and the people in power. We recognize their names and their faces. And as history is written by the victors, their names are also in the textbooks that Georgians like me grew up hearing about. Let us also see the people who will not make it to the big screens, the ordinary, extraordinary humans who risk their lives to save a tiny, breathing bit of humanity. This is the truest form of peace building. We gather today to celebrate peace and the worthwhile journey of building it. We also gather today to fight for peace because in its absence, we have already lost too much. The road to peace is difficult. It is not a carved path to be followed. It is a grove of oranges where the trees have been uprooted and in their place were dug mass graves of men, women, and children missing from and missed by their families. As individuals, as societies, and as an international community, to build peace, we must uncover the metaphorical and physical mass graves and find the courage to face the truth of the fact that we let these war crimes happen before our eyes. We must nourish the soil and find the faith to plant new seeds in this beloved land that has suffered so much. The most rewarding takeaway of the symposium today is that every young person in the room today sees that there is space for you in the peace-building world. You're not just a victim of the conflict. You're not just a young person posing for a group picture in a high-level conference. You are not just a potential future change maker. You are the present. Your stories and your journey matter. In this global movement, you are necessary. Whether you have grown up in a country entrenched in conflict and seen no space for you amongst politicians deciding the fate of your country behind closed doors, or whether you come from a country considered peaceful but with underlying polarization threatening every aspect of democracy. Everywhere in the world right now, we need youth who are resilient and courageous to tackle the difficult challenge of building peace from the roots at times and in places where it often seems impossible. I would like to close with a quote from Nadia's book on the genocide of the Yazidi people. We scaled down our dreams, and it wasn't hard to convince ourselves that those dreams had been unreachable to begin with. May we never scale down our dream of peace and of a life lived in dignity. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and let the symposium begin. I would like to now invite Claire Hajaj, our first panelist, to join me on stage for our first panel. We're honored to have here with us Claire Hajaj. She's Executive Director of Intermediate, and she's a lifelong peace builder. She's also a leading expert on conflict and post-conflict dynamics. Some of you may remember Claire from our spring symposium on peace negotiations, where she shared insights from her career supporting UN-led negotiations in Myanmar, Lebanon, and Iraq. Today, we're very excited to continue this discussion and to focus specifically on the aspect of youth. Where are youth in this conversation? And what are the ways in which youth can be involved? Thank you for joining us, Claire, and I'm delighted to be conversing with you. I'll begin with some opening questions, and then we will open up the floor to the audience to share your thoughts and your questions. So, Claire, I will start by asking about the word peace building. It is a term we hear all the time, and it is one charged with optimism, but also often with a lot of disillusionment. So I'm wondering, what does this word mean to you specifically? And did your understanding of the word change throughout your life?
Okay. So look, first to say, I'm really happy to be here with all of you. And it was quite remarkable having dinner last night with the organizing committee and some others, because it really brought home to me in a way that I think nothing can until you've met people, that this is not an academic exercise for the student organizing committee. These are people for whom peace and conflict is a real thing. It has affected their lives. It's forced them to make difficult choices. It's hurt people close to them. And so this is not an academic exercise for any of us in the world right now. And I don't want to talk about sort of platitudes, because for us at the moment, anybody who's growing up in the world now and coming into their professional life, it's a huge and dominating question. What is peace building and how can we help? I understand the disillusionment, because when I was young, when I was sort of 14, 15, this was the era of the end of the Cold War. This is when the Berlin Wall fell down. This is the era of the end of apartheid. It was the era of the Good Friday Agreement. Peace felt like it meant something. It felt like we were coming out of this dark tunnel and we were emerging into a new era with new possibilities, where there was a very clear North Star that we could follow, and it was a time of optimism. So I think I came into my professional work with this very simple idea of what peace was. Incredibly simple, that it was something easy to deliver. It could almost be brought like an event to people. You could sort of put it in a bucket and take it. And I remember then being just after 9/11, sort of early 2000s, in a remote part of one African country that had not been involved in war per se. And I was doing humanitarian interventions that I thought was really something that would be welcomed by everybody. And I remember somebody coming up to me, angry, crowd of people came to me, furious, didn't want me to come in to their village, even though I was bringing vaccines. And they said, look, you're bombing our brothers in Iraq, and you're bombing our brothers in Palestine, and you expect us to think that you're here giving us free help. You must think we're stupid. And it was a profound realization for me that actually what we think about as, what I had thought about as peace was not what they were thinking about. It's not a simple thing that can be brought. It's not about the absence of violence, but about a perception of fairness and a feeling that opportunities are shared, and that these people did not feel disconnected from the pain that was being suffered by people that they related to. So it did change my idea, and I think the war on terror, as we call it, also profoundly distorted what we think about peace. We're trying to make ourselves more peaceful and secure by exporting violence to other countries. And now we are in a world where that moral north that I felt so much when I was young feels like it's just been smashed, and we have a compass that's swinging wildly. And it's very hard to know then what peace means. And when peacemakers get together and we start talking about, has this dream of big peace agreements, fair and just and lasting peace agreements, is that yesterday's dream? Are we now stuck with short-term transactional peace deals or ceasefires that don't seem to go anywhere? And I think that's a question that now this generation has to answer. Are we satisfied with that? Is that enough? Or is there something that we can do to change it? And that's the question on the table, I think, for all of us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I also love that you brought the idea of justice into peace, because peace itself cannot be without other things. You began your career working as a young professional in public relations and political lobbying before contributing to complex UN-led negotiations. What did you learn from your early career, and what roles did you see younger voices play in such higher level spaces?
So I remember walking into the UN in my mid-20s for the first time, and if there was ever a building that was made for old people, it was that building. From, you know, the old filing cabinets to, you know, everybody who was making decisions, and yet, and it was a legacy architecture. You know, that was what peace meant. It was there. It was supposed to be the enshrinement of peace and the deliverer of peace and the protector of peace. But one of the things that was interesting is that even in this building for old people and for old ideas, you know, as a young person, I saw so much young initiative. And it was a lesson that has always stayed with me, because the people drafting the resolutions, the people running around and coming up with new ideas, the people pushing the boundaries were all young. They were all the young people. They were all at the beginning of their careers, and they hadn't yet learned that things aren't possible. And so they had come in with energy. And I came up with something then that has served me very well in everything that I've done since. Watching people, and also, I mean, young people, let's also be clear, they were the ones paying the price too. They were the ones who were going out to conflict zones. I lost a dear friend of mine, barely 30, in the bomb that killed 22 UN staff members in Iraq. I mean, they were the ones that were putting themselves in harm's way. And one of the lessons that I learned then, very profound for me, has been the power and importance of having the pen in your hand, that he who drafts wins. You know, you may be seeing resolutions presented at the Security Council that are put forward by states, but often they have been drafted and put together by people with the pen in their hand, have been quite young. And people who are ready to come up with initiatives, like the initiative that you have come up with here, this working group, to put on this, and people who are willing to put in the work to make that initiative real. That is an incredibly powerful thing in peacemaking, is the people who are willing to take initiatives. And another lesson that it really drove home to me is that never underestimate, in the world of war and peace, the power of individual decision-making. It can sometimes, again, feel as if we are just on some train that is driven by faceless entities. That's not the case. And there has always been, in every conflict, from David Trimble in Northern Ireland to Soria Jaramillo in Colombia to Svetlana, you know, there has always been individual agency in people deciding how the trajectory of peacemaking goes. And even in let's say, not the high table, the smaller stage. I remember being in Jordan once at the time of one of the many, many Gaza conflicts. And the UN was then really under fire because it had been helpless to stop the conflict. And Palestinians in Jordan were furious, and they were angry, and they were marching on UN premises. And relatively young head of one of the agencies in the area made the decision to go downstairs and go into the street and go and stand and talk to protesters. Now, it may not seem like a big decision, but it was. It was a big decision because it was the first time in a long time that somebody had said, I will come down to where you are and I will face your anger and I will be accountable. And that sent a signal, which was powerful. So, I mean, the power of individual decision-making and the ability to take initiative in the UN and other places has shaped the way that decisions get made. And we must never forget that the power is actually in our hands.
Thank you. And I think it's important that we know that the people who are perpetrating the conflicts, they do want us to feel small. How have you seen the role of youth in peace negotiations shift over the years? And in this, I would like to add that in yesterday's conversation, we're talking a lot about whether it's most important for youth to be inside the room or to influence the discussions outside the negotiating rooms.
Yeah, I mean, so in a lot of the conflict and peace processes that I've been part of, you have this sort of there is this tokenistic approach that I'm not a fan of, which says, you know, well, we need a youth delegation so that we can sort of tick the box that we have consulted youth. And I think that is so massively underplaying the hand that young people hold today in the world when it comes to shaping the agenda of what should be discussed in war and peace processes and how governments should feel, you know, what room they feel they have to maneuver. Because just being in the room is not enough, and it's actually sometimes the least powerful thing. It can look like inclusion when it's actually exclusion. It's a way of saying, come and give me your 5 minutes and your piece of paper and then shut the door. Now, the world has changed since I first started working in this industry. And now we are in a new world where, as I think I said to you last night, that really all foreign policy is domestic policy because diaspora communities all over the world, and also because youth, in a way, is its own nationality. It's not a nationality that is specific to a country. It is an ability to feel as if we should be able to remodel the world so that it just works better and doesn't feel so hopeless. So the ability of young people using the tools that are now available to grab the attention of policymakers, and I think 3 ways I've seen the world shift. One is in creating a sense of demand. Whatever you know, that there have been in the US and in the UK, 100 different opinions on encampments, but nobody can argue that it did not create a demand for change and put pressure and exert pressure. And it also, young people, in the way that they are able to organize and able to organize across countries, not even just in their own areas, can also set parameters. What do we feel needs to be on the table? So it's not enough just to ask for inclusion of young people. You also have to come with ideas for this is what we think resolution can look like. This is what we think should be fair. This is the product of our debates. And you have the ability to amplify that off the table. In a way, the challenge is to create a table off the table, because the rooms where these decisions get made are always going to be exclusive. So really the job of young people is to create the demand, the parameters, and finally the accountability. Off the table, a place where there is such a loud kind of demand for people to take certain steps that it's difficult for governments to ignore. And I think that's something where I don't think the full capacity has yet been really explored.
Thank you. I'm wondering, after you left the UN, you have been working in Intermediate. How does Intermediate's approach to brokering peace negotiations differ from that of larger international actors?
So I think we're a little bit like the sort of the youth of peacemaking, because we're very small. We can't bring big carrots and sticks to the table. We can't sanction people or offer them big financial deals. We're agile, and I think we are also an organization like Intermediate is a reflection of a world where the big institutions that were set up to deliver peace are felt not to be doing their job. Now, I just want to be really clear. I worked for the UN for 17 years or more, and I love the United Nations, and I love what it stands for, but nobody can argue that it has not been absolutely eviscerated in its inability to stop conflicts. And I think everybody I know and respect who's worked for the United Nations would agree that this sense that there is sort of big institutions that can just bring justice, bring peace, that can be a human rights guarantor, that can be a humanitarian aid provider, that can be a political brokering center. It's just not possible. It's schizophrenic. So an organization like ours reflects also a change in the way that then conflicts are resolved. So the era of the big mediator sitting down at the table and sort of moving between parties, and like Kofi Annan, increasingly conflict parties don't want that in many ways. And what they want instead, what they need is in the very loneliest job that a leader will ever face, which is trying to find a way off the battlefield and to the talks table, the most high-risk tightrope job, is advice and support and lessons from past processes that have worked. And my colleague likes to call it going to the balcony, being able to take a step back and think long term. And that's what we try to be able to provide. Now, there has to be a world where there is an international framework in under which we can all operate. And it feels like that international framework is completely broken. Until that framework is revived somehow in a consensus way, the role for private, I don't want to say private sector, but private initiative of people is going to be very, very important. And where small, agile, discrete, whether it's individuals, whether it's organizations, to come in and say, we will fill that gap, there's going to be a demand for that.
Thank you. What principles guide your organization's work, and what are some success stories that you've seen?
So all peacemaking has to come from a place of do no harm. It's a concept that I think probably people know. Does anybody not know the concept of do no harm? It's this idea that the things like me with my vaccine carrier in a remote part of the world, thinking that I'm doing a good thing, and it's not perceived in the same way, that the actions that we take that are designed to help may actually hurt. So do no harm and impartiality. But I think there are other things that are much more fundamental in a way for me as well. One of them is to remember that the real client are the people that you can't see, and they're the people on the front line. So when we are mediating, when we're in the room with decision makers, when we're advising, it's easy for it to become like a political thing. And it's very important to see behind that leader or behind that decision maker the rows and rows and rows of people who can never get into that room, who are on the front lines of whatever decisions are taken, remembering that they are the people that you're actually there to help. That is fundamental. Humanity, I think, is another thing. And these are often leaders who have done, some of them have done terrible things. And it's always complicated. But being able to understand that even in these people who have done terrible things, there's a human process, and that they have to feel that you understand that process. And an example of this was, we were working with one particular leader who was perceived to have taken power in his country unconstitutionally, was facing an enormous pushback. And there was a long, long negotiation to try and get him and opposition parties to sit down together. And that negotiation ended up with, in the end, him having to leave power. And he called us shortly after, and we gave our good wishes for his future. And he said, you know, in all of this, it was very difficult, but I really felt you understood. And that's important, because without that, you have no trust. And then the final thing, I think, when we talk about trust and confidentiality, that's all fine, but the key thing, I think, for one of the things that has been most important for us is persistence. It's a long game, peacemaking. Northern Ireland, it took 10 years. No, gosh, more than that. Well, decades, but the actual Good Friday Agreement process took years. Colombia, 8 years. Mozambique, 6 or 7 years. And many take much more. And being able to be there for the long term has been for us totally fundamental. And I think also just that being able to kind of pick up from failures. So one example of that was trying to negotiate a power sharing agreement in a country. Again, I don't want to be too explicit about where, but it was a power sharing agreement that we spent, I remember they decided to start negotiating it while I went on holiday with my family. And I got a phone call at the airport saying, we want to go into negotiations. I was like, oh God, no, please. But okay, so I spent a week in a room while everybody else was at the pool, just doing online negotiations, which is a new thing. And after that, a couple of weeks of negotiations, an agreement was reached and the parties would not sign it. And it was devastating, absolutely devastating. Not just for me, and I was genuinely quite devastated, but for the country as well. And skip forward a year, and the dynamics changed. A new set of actors came to the table. There was a new political opening. They pulled this agreement out of the filing cabinet, and they revisited it, and it was signed. And it was an extraordinary moment. And like many moments, there have been a lot of problems since, but it was a reminder that all successes are built on the bones of past failures, and that persistence and being there for the long term is key.
Thank you so much for that. I love the focus on showing understanding and empathy, being human, and focusing on the people themselves. Conflicts today are increasingly being shaped by non-state actors, misinformation, and digital polarization. How is peacebuilding adapting to 21st century dynamics, and what are the new roles that youth can play in this?
How are we adapting? Badly, I would say. I mean, I feel like it's like we're in a transition from the era of the dinosaurs to the cyborgs, and we're just not quite there yet. And it is terrifying to see now the way that, you know, we said before about the levers of conflict are now held by so many millions of people. Conflicts are more transnational. They're not necessarily just about one country. They're more fragmented. And it is true that you can be sitting in your basement in Eastern Europe, coming up with a video that's going to send 20,000 people out onto the streets in, I don't know, Latakia or Homs or wherever, and it's going to kill. And it's so easy, and we don't know quite how to deal with this yet. But I think there's also an extraordinary opportunity in there because, as I said before, one of the great, in order to deal with this, it's not going to be a thing that governments can deal with, and it's not going to be something that institutions can deal with. We can sit there and come up with norms and conventions, but what we need, what peacemakers need, is imagination, practical ingenuity, and to be able to take the tools that are being used to sow misinformation and to confuse and make more dense and complex the fog of war, which is a real thing, and use those tools to be able to illuminate. You know, gaming and AI and social media and all of these things that we've seen how they've been used to sow dissent and increase polarization. So the people that are going to come up with solutions are the young tech experts, other youth mobilizers, other networkers who are going to come together and say, actually, let's take our expertise in convening people with the expertise in platform development, with the expertise in art and the power of storytelling to convene people and come up with answers. A friend of mine used to say, he was a negotiator in the earlier days of the Arab-Israeli conflict, Stockholm and Camp David. And he has recently said that for biblical conflicts, you need prophets, not diplomats. And I slightly feel that we're in the same thing now with this new era that we find ourselves in. We don't need diplomats, we need inventors. And that is where I think you guys come in.
You mentioned storytelling, so I would like to bring your novel. The book here, Ishmael's Oranges, it explores themes of personal histories and intergenerational wounds, and it is actually a love story between a Palestinian refugee and a British Jewish girl that experiences a lot of anti-Semitism. What was the process like to write this book, and what are areas that you think art can bring that policymaking and diplomacy can sometimes fail to illuminate?
So I wrote this book for my daughter, but I also wrote it for my families, because it seemed to me that, my families, as you may know, my mother is a British Jew and my father is a Palestinian Muslim, and my mother's family carried the whole sort of history of Jewish suffering. Her sister was adopted off the kinder transports, her ancestors fled the pogroms and the rise of Nazism in Eastern Europe. In Europe, and my father's family were interned in Ajami during the siege of Jaffa in April 1948, so before the establishment of the State of Israel, and felt they had lost everything to the rise of Israel. So these are two families who had narratives that they believed absolutely that were completely contradictory. And they were never, ever in the same room when I was growing up. So I wanted, in my book, to put them in the same room. And I also wanted, this is why sometimes you need storytelling, not documentary. Because documentary can tell you what happened, and it's something that you can argue about forever. But storytelling can show you why people believe that something happened, and what that belief will drive them to do, and how it shapes and designs their life and their allegiances. And that is something that was really important, to show how two versions of history can basically be true. Now, the thing that, I know this is, again, it's really difficult for peacemaking, that sometimes, and I have found in different conflicts, be it the Arab-Kurdish conflict to others, that there is this very intense desire to have people understand a version of history, and that peacemakers can spend an awful lot of time trying to make different versions of history align. But I think of it more like parallel lines. You have to find a place in the future where they can intersect. And that's the job, it's a narrative job in peacemaking, of trying to come up with, and we might call it the victory speech, we might call it something else, but a point in history where people can say, we have what we need in order to take the next step forward, and without necessarily having to have resolved everything. And I understand what you said in your speech there, when you said we have to accept what's happened in the past. And it is an unending debate amongst peacemakers, is that at what point in the process does that come? Does that come before you have agreed to make peace? Or does that come after? And I think one of the very powerful things that young people can do as well, because often by the time you're there, you haven't necessarily yourself lived through the experiences, but you carry the stories of your family, as I carried the story of mine. And so the relationship with those stories is different. We can hear them and we can bring them into common spaces and start that process of looking ahead, of kind of carrying the history, but looking ahead at the same time, to create an environment in which politicians feel that peace would not be a career-ending move for them, that it would be possible. And that's a very, very powerful thing to be able to do. And that's one of the things that, one of the reasons I wrote the book was to try and get people into a place where they could hear the story of the other side, feel it viscerally, without having to come up with 100 reasons to contradict it, and see how it resonated with their own experience.
Thank you. This is beautiful. Other than policy and multilateral cooperation, what are spaces such as storytelling in which youth can be more involved?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a lot yesterday. This is about how you create the table off the table. I hear a lot of people talking about, we want to be more in the room, but that is not necessarily where young people can have the greatest impact on war and peace decisions. Sometimes it's about creating an environment in which policymakers, first of all, feel as if there is a powerful local demand for them to take certain steps. And that is to do with the power of youth convening and using platforms to create volume. And it's something we've seen young people do really effectively, off the table. And in mobilizing, and I don't necessarily just mean youth organizations, I mean young people in all walks of life, whether it be in academia, whether it be in the private sector, whether it be in art. So it's creating sort of powerful space, and moving the Overton window for policy decisions on peace. So we've seen recently how the demand of young people can push governments to take action, because it creates a sense of demand. And this was also true in other conflicts in the past, in Northern Ireland and others, where there was mass movements also of young people in civil society that gave politicians the feeling that there was a wind blowing them forward, but also that if they were to go ahead and take the steps to make the difficult political compromises that peace would make, then that would be welcomed by the population of tomorrow, that it would have some legitimacy. So I think in these convening spaces outside, whether it be online, whether it be through networking internationally, and coming up with platforms that create and generate ideas, I think these are the places where young voices can be really incredibly powerful. Other ways, actually, and coming back to tech, we haven't worked out how to use tech in peacemaking properly yet, but that is the job for this generation, because the people that come up with the models and the ideas are going to shape the way that debates about conflict resolution and peace agreements are had going forward. And people who can also, and I think this is really significant, help. So I want to give an example. So there are all kinds of, in Venezuela, during the last election, it was young people who came up with the strategy to monitor and report on electoral violations at the booths, and also actually how the vote tally went, which made it then impossible for some of the actors in other countries in Latin America to recognize an election that was seen as so deeply flawed. And there have been multiple other examples of where young people have actually created ideas that have, and come up with initiatives that have profoundly impacted the way that decisions have been taken. And an example of where that didn't happen was in Colombia, where there was insufficient outreach to mobilize youth communities ahead of the first referendum on the peace agreement, and that referendum didn't pass. The second time, working much more cohesively, it was able to pass. So these are the ways I think that young people can really get involved, and there's a big space, bigger more than ever.
Thank you so much. It is now time for us to move to audience questions. So I would like to invite everyone to please ask your questions and introduce yourself before asking the question. Do we have any people? Yeah.
I mean, I can understand why you would feel that way and why people feel that way. And I wake up feeling that way. Hello? Oh, there. We can all feel powerless from time to time. But the truth is that the future is yours, and you guys are going to be the ones that are making the decisions. And so start now. That it's never, ever too late, and it's never too early. This is going to be a generational process. We are in the business now of changing the way the international system looks, of changing what is acceptable, and now is a very, very difficult time. But this is the time to prepare, and let the politicians be short-term. It's our job. Outside of politics, we can be long-term, and we can get involved, and we can work on learn the lessons of past processes and those lessons and what they have to offer for the future. Get involved in conflicts in your communities, whether it's polarization or whatever it may be, because one day you may be sitting there and somebody's going to ask you a question about how to help them, and you're going to want to be able to respond from your own experience and have credibility. There are always things that you can do, and it's never the right decision to downplay your own power and your ability to mobilize change. Individual decisions are powerful. People working together with all of their initiatives and different skills, they will absolutely shape the future. So yeah, I can understand that it feels at the moment as if it's a really, really heavy lift. But it's when everybody else gives up that there's most space for the people who are ready to take the initiative.
We have a question from an online audience member, Heidi Desaker. Power sharing can be an important part of a peace agreement, but it may also be a substitute for peace if the parties to power sharing are not accountable to civilian power. Can you speak a little bit about this tension? And they say that for context, I'm an aid worker in Darfur, where several power sharing agreements in the past 2 decades have led to today's ethnic cleansing and humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, I completely agree that it's a very imperfect solution, and it should never be seen to be the end of a process, always the beginning. So it's one of the difficult features of conflict today, that we seem to get stuck at the halfway point. We can make a ceasefire, we can make a power sharing agreement, but we can't go beyond that. And one of the things that I have still not come to terms with in my own thinking, because it's a very, very hard thing to really face, is that there is always a price for peace. In the same way that there is a price for war, there is a price that gets paid at these negotiation tables, and someone pays it. You know, you're either sacrificing the rights of someone or the future, or you're sacrificing the lives of the people that are going to be lost if you don't come up with an agreement to silence the guns. And that is a really, really difficult decision. How do you weigh those rights and those lives? So I think the dilemma of how you move from stage 1, the end of violence, to stage 2, a peace that is just and lasting in this environment, and how you avoid getting stuck in something that just resets to zero, as we have in so many conflicts for the last 20 years. It's just that we need a big structural rethink. But the most important thing, I think, is to be clear in ourselves, and this goes for peacemakers, politicians, and also those that are shaping the environment in which peace gets made, that we are not satisfied with being stuck at phase one and breaking through to a peace that is lasting and gives people something fundamental that they want and need, not just politicians' share of the spoils, is really, really critical.
Nadia?
Hello. Oh, hi. My name is Nadia. It's a pleasure to have met you yesterday, and it's a pleasure to speak to you again. My question goes like this. It is very likely that if I get into a debate about an issue with someone who's also young, we might disagree on what is right or what is actually needed. So how is it, it's safe to say that youth is also divided. It's not all youth is on the same page about global issues or even local issues. So how is it that youth are capable of overcoming this division the way diplomats and older people haven't or can't?
So a couple of things on that. I think to be divided is human. So, I mean, everybody, often in conflicts, everybody can agree that something needs to be done, but that's the minute that you start trying to define what it is that needs to be done, that's where things start to fall over. And I think it's not necessarily true to say that young people can overcome divisions where older people can't. I think we all find it difficult to overcome divisions, and it becomes much more difficult when the outcome of those decisions has real-world implications for yourself, for your constituents, and for your political future and for the future of a nation. And that's where politicians need courage, because these things can be existential for them. There's nothing that can be so quickly career-killing or also potentially life-ending as making a concession that one of your constituents feels betrays a cause. So political courage and the willingness to take risks is fundamental to making peace agreements. And what can create and help create that political courage is a feeling that the energy and support of society, and particularly young people, is behind you. So I think that it's not so much thinking we can agree and these older guys can't. It's more like, how can our energy and determination and resilience provide a space that encourages our leaders to take the risks that they need to take in order to overcome the differences that they will inevitably have in a conflict zone.
The student on the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Nobel. I'm a PhD student in political science. I have a question regarding the role of military forces or paramilitary forces in peace building. And of course, just by saying that, as a US citizen, I find myself already challenged by that question. But the reason that I ask is because I had just finished a 3-month stint of fieldwork in Nepal, where, as you can imagine, there was a Gen Z movement that had just occurred, and there was subsequent violence that all sides could very well have been responsible for enacting. But at the end of that week that occurred in September, there was the General Ashok Sidel, and the military came in and essentially was, for the most part, largely welcomed, although there were journalists that had spoken out against the role of the military getting involved in this political situation. And so, thinking about that, I am curious to what extent these kinds of military forces should be involved, not just where I have been, but in other countries, especially when in that situation, the military forces literally came in to say the they would do this job in negotiating peace, and then they literally withdrew without inciting any backlash or further resentment. Albeit there was protest in the media outlets themselves, but not necessarily so in the ways we might expect with this kind of presence to mediate a peace deal.
Thanks. I mean, I'll answer this briefly because the role of military in conflicts is a long one. You know, whether military should or shouldn't be an actor, I mean, they are a powerful actor in war zones, obviously, in conflict zones, and it's always troubling and challenging when militaries become involved in changing governments, whether they do it and stay or whether they do it and leave. But we've seen Bangladesh and we've seen in Nepal and others, and sometimes those outcomes are positive, sometimes, as in Sudan, it's incredibly negative. So I think, though, that one of the things that that I've experienced in my work around the world is whether it's in Colombia, where the military played a key role in actually creating the space for President Santos to make an agreement, and other parts of Africa where militaries are fighting non-state armed groups, and where they need to believe that looking for political dialogue alternatives rather than going in and trying to wipe everybody out is not surrender, but sense. And whether, you know, we know that that's going to be, it's really fundamental to be able to engage with these actors. The truth is that there are no military solutions to conflicts, and there really never has been a military solution to conflicts long term. And military actors also are become key advocates and enablers for peace if they believe that. I think it's slightly different when military actors step in and enforce a change. That's a whole sort of more complicated and different thing, but working with militaries to move them towards the path of political solutions is fundamental to conflict resolution.
Hi, I'm Morgan, and I just wanted to ask, how can you work with young people to prevent revenge when their family has been killed during bombings or other attacks?
Yeah, I mean, this is dealing with the wounds of war, particularly in the young, is probably one of the most fundamental parts of trying to reach long-term peace. And I think it's different in every conflict, and every conflict has to think about, as part of a peace agreement, how you address the crimes and the pain, and how you work with people to try and make sure that they see a different path forward. I don't think, you know, pain is a deep human instinct. I don't think revenge is necessarily. I think people do want to be able to move on with their lives, but sometimes that pain is just very hard to get past. So transitional justice and the search for justice, a little bit like you're talking about, like how you deal with the legacy, whether that legacy is the pain of indignity, or whether it's physical loss, and whether it's physical harm that you yourself have suffered. They all need to be built into programs. The creating the willingness for that kind of healing to happen and making it possible in society. One of the things that I've found is it's very, very, very difficult to do that while conflicts are ongoing. It's really difficult to do it to tell people to move past their suffering when new suffering is being created all the time. So it's one of those things, again, where young people and civil society and others can come together and try and create that initial demand for healing, and that initial, you know, try to create that a demand that leads to governments feeling willing to take steps for de-escalation and to put these sorts of programs in place. And there have been some amazing examples in Colombia, for example, and you saw the Transitional Justice Program, where members of FARC militia had to go down to communities where they had raped and killed with impunity for years and face their victims and actually face them in the room is a really incredible thing. So we're going to have to look at those programs in Ukraine and in Russia and the Middle East, and they're never going to be easy. I know that some people are dealing with them now and trying to find ways to stop people being recruited into non-state armed groups as a response to some of the violence inflicted on them by states. So it's a huge dilemma, it's a huge issue, but there's a lot of very good experience out there in how to make it work, and it cannot work without the participation of young people in their societies.
Thank you so much, Claire. We will now have to be wrapping up the panel. We'll be transitioning into a coffee break. Feel free to ask Claire more questions during the coffee break and to approach our other speakers as well. I've learned so much from this conversation, Claire. Please join me.
All right, so I am honored to be joined by three international peacemakers who all began their pursuits in peace building at very young ages and can provide us with insights into various stages of life and various stages of making peace. I am joined by Alana Gebremariam, who is a Belarusian pro-democracy activist and former political prisoner and the head of the Social Commission of the Coordination Council, a group established to facilitate a peaceful transition of power in Belarus. I am also joined by Cristina Rosario Arteaga, who is a Colombian lawyer with a master's degree in human rights. She serves as a senior legal advisor for the Center of Reproductive Rights, Latin America and Caribbean Program. And I am joined by Amos Chiingi, who is the founder and national director of Uganda Unites, a youth-led movement in Uganda that works to promote peace and reconciliation by connecting young people from different religions and ethnic backgrounds. And today we're going to start off with a question for all three of our speakers. Many young people today feel overwhelmed by the obstacles to peace building. How did you first get started with your work, and what advice do you have for other young people looking to make change? Alana, if you'd like to get us started.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak on this perfect event, symposium, and I'm very glad that there are a lot of people that are interested in peace building, and I think we can, find very good decisions here. And when people ask me how I started my activism and peace building actions, I always said accidental, because it's not about peace is accidental, but because injustice leaves you no choice. And the first time I understand it, it was when my father faced discrimination because of he's Ethiopian, and he have lived in Belarus a lot of years, but sometimes in Belarus, of course, people of color meet discrimination. And at that moment, I understand that silence can protect the powerful, and also that we need to act for changes, act a lot for changes. And then the second time I understand it, it was at the university, when I would like to spread some knowledge and skills and organize some initiatives, independent initiatives. But in Belarusian universities, it's very complicated to do some independent events because of all of events controlled by administration ideologically. And also in that moment, I understand that peace for me, it's not only about preventing wars or conflicts, it's also about right to participate, about opportunities, about freedom and dignity. And when we're talking about peace, also it's very important to express that we all need to do something, and we all need to make efforts to changes, because sometimes it's very difficult to take risk, but we need to take this risk for changes. So yeah, I think that in that way my way started. It was started in Peacebuilding, and of course I can advise a lot, but firstly, I think I need to say that you need to be very active and courage.
Hi.
Oh, there you go. You got that.
All right, thank you.
Well, I come from a really small town near the border with Ecuador, and it was affected by conflict since my younger years. So there's no way, as a Colombian, you are not touched by armed conflict. And I was always interested on gender issues, and our history made that basically feminist movements early on made peace their primordial objective. So there's no way you work on gender issues in Colombia without being around the pacifist movement in my country. So I was really interested in reproductive rights, and arms conflict in Colombia affected reproductive rights. As part of this feminist movement, we already had massive steps on documenting sexual violence against women and girls around the country, but we realized that something was missing. It was the ways in which the conflict also affected people's ability to make decisions about their own bodies and reproduction. And because of that, we undertook a really detailed review on documentation from civil society organizations and other reports. And across more than 68 reports, we found clear evidence of forms of reproductive violence that include forced abortion, forced contraception, forced sterilization, forced pregnancy, and forced motherhood. And we found patterns that are largely invisible because less public attention had focused on other issues and not in this part. When we started naming this, we were able to bring reproductive rights into the conversation and to understand the several forms in which women and girls were affected during war, and open doors for advocacy and accountability in different forms. It also strengthened a long-standing peace movement in Colombia, which was always connected with this feminist movement that was also so vibrant and important. And a crucial element on this story is also young feminists. I was part of those young feminists who work on that. But we work on mobilization, protest, community dialogues, and creative campaigns to present the reality of women and girls during war, and that led to us having a representation in the peace negotiations. It wasn't easy, and it had obstacles, but feminists took the possibility to be part of that. That led to something that is historical in Colombia, which is the first time of a peace agreement with gender mandates. And this mandate covers all transitional justice mechanisms, including the Commission for the Clarification for the Truth, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, which has the justice part, and the Unit for the Search of Disappeared Persons that are required to implement their work with a gender perspective. The HEP, for example, recognized for the first time this past year patterns of reproductive justice, particularly such as for reproductive violence, such as forced conception and forced abortion within the ranks of the FARC-EP guerrilla. And even in the case of the Truth Commission, we were able to find recognition on reproductive violence, including in the final report, several of its modalities. And all that work was led by young feminists within the Truth Commission, who take over the possibility to not only talk about these issues, but also convincing commissionaries that many, many times are not concerned about these issues, for them to include that part in the final report. So for us, it's been more than 10 years work, but we feel like we're going in a good direction in terms of recognition, and we still have a lot of challenges in terms of implementation, but this is the first time a Truth Commission ever in the world has recognized specific patterns of reproductive violence and violations against reproductive rights. And I think that's something important. So when I'm asked for advice for young people, I always say start from the stories that have been left out. Think on those people who are not being seen in these processes, build collective strength, learn from the movements that came before you, and don't be afraid to connect struggles that seem separate, like peace building and reproductive justice. The transformation of law and culture begins when young people dare to imagine peace not only by the absence of war, but also by the presence of equality, dignity, and autonomy for all.
My story is a bit unique because when I started out, I didn't start out wanting to be a peace builder. I wanted to be an accountant. I wanted to sit behind a desk and make sure that the balance sheet was good. But during my work as an accountant, we ended up in going and working on a project in the northern part of Uganda, where the part of that part of the country is just recovering from a 20-year-long conflict. And some of you might know about the Lord's Resistance Army, the LRA, Joseph Cohen. And so we had gone there. Young people were returning from IDP camps, many of them born into those IDP camps. And the project I was working on at the time was trying to see how do they come from IDP camps into communities where they hadn't lived at all for many years, and now they had to figure out how to live lives. And an aspect of that project was getting them to be able to figure out how to do income generation so that they could earn an income from it. And that's where the accountant aspect of my life was coming in, and how I ended up in a place recovering from conflict. But with every young person that I engaged with during this process, I saw how so many dreams were shattered before they even started. And the thing that kept on coming to my mind was, why did this war take so long to end? And why is it that so many young people are affected and their dreams were cut short? And I kept on thinking that this could happen anywhere else in the country. And I looked at the time we were putting in to build projects and try to set up these young people. And I kept on thinking, what happens in 2 years if this war broke out again? And I wanted to do something about it. But at the end of the time I was there, I went back to the capital in Kampala. And as life happens, I got back into my routine, and I started to forget about the issues that I was starting to get passionate about. Until there was a point where we had what was called the Buganda riots, a riot led by people from my tribe in the country because the central government had stopped the king of my tribe from accessing a certain part of the kingdom. And so young people took to the streets and were targeting the ethnic group that the president comes from. And one of the people that was being targeted was a friend of mine. And she was stuck in an office like here and surrounded by different roadblocks of young people who were asking you your name, your heritage, and if it didn't align with the tribe that I belong to, then you would get attacked for it. And she called, and I had to drive to pick her up. And the drive there, I saw so much devastation and so much hate, anger. And I thought to myself, it took me back to my time of working in the northern part, recovering from conflict. And I kept on asking myself, why is our country in a cycle of violence? And maybe to paint a picture for those who do not know, Uganda has never had a peaceful transition of power. Since independence in 1962, every president that has come into power has come in by way of violence. And so on that day, managing to get my friend from that office and get her into safety, I kept on thinking back to something could have happened. I could have lost a friend. I could have, so many people, so many families could have lost a parent today, a brother, because of hate. And so I wanted to do something. And then, as chance would have it, I met a young man from Sri Lanka called Prashant Divisa, and he had been working with young people to bring together, some of you who might know the story of Sri Lanka, the Sinhala and the Tamils had been fighting for many years, but he had figured out that if you engage young people in their formative years and start to change the narrative by bringing them to understand each other and see each other as human beings, then everything, every stereotype that had been put in their minds by so many different generations could be erased for them to be able to start working together to build a better space and a better country for themselves. And so when I heard him talk about that, I was very intrigued, and I decided to jump on a plane at his invitation, go to Sri Lanka, meet other young peace builders, and decided while I was there and seeing how much transformation that had done, I believed that if we came back to Uganda and started an organization that was focused on just changing mindset from an early age and building leaders for the future and catching them early in the sense that those young people that would fight the future war, making sure that they are not radicalized now or recruited for them to be engaged in those conflicts would be the solution for us to build a safer, better country. And so I went back to Uganda. I quit my accounting job and decided to account for lives. And that has been my story for coming to 10 years next year. But I think for me, the advice as part of the question that was put to us is many young people, many of you who are in this room, whenever you look at yourself, you do not see yourself as qualified to be able to be in a space, to be able to engage and create change. But I would like to put it to you that you are all qualified. If you see an injustice, if you see something that needs attention, if not you, then who? If you do not take the step, then who will? If we all sit back and wait for a moment when somebody else will step in and make that change, then we will probably not get to see that change come to life. But if we take a chance on ourselves and start the work and do it consistently and keep at it, because when I started out, I knew nothing about the things that I was doing, but I kept at it. I reached out to people who I felt were more qualified than I was and asked to be mentored into it and started to learn. And I think the other most important thing was listening. I started to listen to the young people who were affected by the conflict and not making it about me and what I wanted to change, but making it about them and what peace meant to them. What did peace mean to them, and how could we work alongside them to realize that peace? And for me, one of the advice that I like to give young people is, you might have disagreements with people, but do you understand their story? So I always ask people, can you listen to the other person? Can you put on their shoes for a day and just get to understand why they are as angry as they are, so that then you will be able to understand why they react the way they react to you before you react to them. And yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing these insights into your life's work. My next question is for Ilana. As someone who was imprisoned for your beliefs, how would you advise young people who want to engage politically but who fear for their safety or potential repercussions?
Oh. Yeah. You know, I am not a good advisor because of my imprisonment. You know, it's very complicated to talk about safety because at that moment in 2020, It wasn't for me about safety. It was about how I can help student movement and youth movement, and to be quick and active to, to prevent victims, because students took to the streets every day, and a lot of them was sentenced, arrested. They needed to be evacuated, and I was representative of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the president-elect of Democratic Forces in 2020 for youth issues. So it was my job, like directly, to help people, and I think it's like all about my life. I think a lot about people and trying to help them. And for me, it's a key, and when, if you ask about imprisonment, I was imprisoned for my beliefs, for my political views, of course, for my activism, for helping youth. And in the prison, I understand that, fear becomes real when you lose freedom. And hatred also become real because you're surrounded by it in this system. And I learned something important, and I think it's it's essential to talk about it, because fear never goes away. It's always behind us. We walk beside it, and it's very important to understand it, and not to fear, not to fear to feel this emotion. So, and courage is not absence of fear, is a refusal to be ruled by fear. And I think it's very important for me to understand this. And I have a story. I think once in prison, I was with a lot of other prisoners, not only political prisoners, but also prisoners in different criminal cases, like murders, drugs, and others criminal cases. And there was a woman that constantly betrayed me. She worked for administration in prison. She reported everything I said. She tried to, did all of possible for her to, did my life in prison horrible. So, and one day she fell on the stone stairs and broke her knee. And I found myself standing in front of her and trying to, to understand what should I do, what would be a correct decision. Because, I am a medic by training, and for me it's essential to help people and save their lives as I can. And but it was a very difficult decision, because you are not in a safe place, and in front of you person who tried to betray you every day, and she caused me so much harm. And but at the moment I decide that it's it's the answer. It's the answer of what peace is. It's to save person if you don't like it. It's defend people even you understand that they wouldn't defend you. That's what humanity means for me, and I think for many people. It's not about liking people, it's about protecting them, it's about save their dignity, it's about possibility of change. So after my release, I started work for political prisoners, for women political prisoners especially, and I became the head of the Social Commission of the Coordination Council, and now my work is concentrated on the helping women, also resocialization of women, also helping their families, also helping in evacuation and different other difficult stuff, And also in the recent years, I I have also been as a part of negotiations with representatives of State Department and European authorities. Of course, the main issue is for us release women political, not only women, but it's my focus to release political prisoners. Sometimes the talks with them, with diplomats and politicians, are very difficult and very slow. But these talks often remind me that peace is not about some victory or some reward. It's a long road. It's a complex walk with a lot of difficulties, And peace begins with listening and empathy inside us. We've seen human beings, as my colleague said here, and not just political side, not just political ambitions, and so on. So to young people who won't act but afraid, I can say it, I understand you. It's okay that you're afraid. But if you take that risk, you give others, courage to believe that change is possible. That one person cannot destroy all darknesses in the world, but one act of truth, of dignity, of solidarity can make it retreat. So I think it's very important to understand that all of us fear, but without our responsibility, our actions, we won't be able to, to find a better place for our lives, to find how to solve these conflicts.
Thank you so much for that insight on overcoming courage together. Continuing on that theme of women's and girls' issues, Christina, can you share some strategies for how your team was able to incorporate issues concerning women and girls onto more national level conversations and negotiations that were not historically prioritizing those issues or concerns?
Well, basically in Colombia, young people, and particularly young women, have played a crucial role in building peace and advocating for gender justice and other issues. For example, the work of young people in Colombia is really rooted on community-based and political strategic. We have had initiatives in the grassroots organization, also educational initiatives in rural areas, and there's a long-standing history of local organizations having built trust with the communities to understand better how many issues have affected them during conflict. And since in Colombia the armed conflict is way too complex, and there's many armed groups, and it's been changing through time because it's been 60 years now. There's been actually only these grassroots organizations are the ones who are able to deeply understand the impacts, the dimensions of the conflict, and also how to build peace locally by creating these social networks that help each other within those really difficult times. So it's the work of young feminist leaders who bring this reality to the table. And I think there's a connection between those young feminist women working in local areas with people working in Bogota, with the entities, with the stakeholders, to bring those specific experiences to the conversation. And we have a couple of samples that we believe is really important. For example, since we got this mandate of a gender perspective in every transitional justice mechanism, when the Truth Commission started to work, they created the Gender Working Group, and it was operated for 3 years, and primarily it was led by young feminist women, women who were actually with us in the protest, in the march, building peace. and advocating for the negotiations and for the peace agreement. And they were the ones who took leadership within the commission to try to get mentions and recognitions in the final report of various forms of gender-based violence against women and girls, and including both sexual and reproductive violence as those forms. And this was historic. It was the first time any Truth Commission recognized reproductive violence as a form of gender-based violence and issued specific recommendations for its comprehensive reparation, which now led us to the possibility to advocate for those type of reparations with victims. And these achievements were only possible because these young women took the time and the internal work of convincing commissioners to work with their teams and in some cases also use the power of the civil society organizations when other young feminists were to create pressure to build these efforts into this bigger conversation. And in the Special Jurisdiction for Peace also, many of the judges and the staff have championed for gender justice, but also come from a background of being part of the feminist movement as young women. Through their leadership and with the support and pressure also from civil society organizations, they created, for example, Macro Case 11, who's the first one that is going to be specifically focused on gender-based and reproductive violence. So all this energy, I think it comes not only in this type of winnings, but also happen, for example, in other fights for reproductive rights in Colombia, such as the decriminalization of abortion. The same energy of young feminist women who were actually involved in all the peace process and all these wins were also involved in the Causa Justa movement, the fair cause movement, that was the way we called it. I was part of the lawyers who drafted the lawsuit against the crime of abortion before the Constitutional Court. And we successfully advocated for the decriminalization of abortion in 2022. And it was through social media, art, street actions, legal mobilization, that young women helped us to shift the public narratives and to overcome the stigma around this issue. And we created the conditions for the Constitutional Court to recognize abortion up to the 24 weeks as part of women's autonomy. I remember when we were rallying outside the Constitutional Court like 6 years ago with other cases, we only got 20 people. When we started rallying for this Causa Justa movement lawsuit, it was amazing to see all young women actually going outside from their classes in the universities close to the Constitutional Court and going down the hills in Bogota to join us. And before, no one was carrying like a green bandana, which is now the symbol of the movement. And now I was seeing like the entire street full of young women with the green bandanas, and I was like so touched by it, because I thought 6 years ago this was unimaginable, but they were the ones who made it possible, and they were the ones who basically created the possibility for the Constitutional Court to see the importance of this issue and to understand that it goes beyond a good lawsuit. So we could have drafted the best lawsuit ever, but without this support and without the mobilization of young women, it wouldn't be possible to have that change created. So we deeply believe that this is the work that is need to be done, and we deeply believe in the fact that young women need to be involved in all these conversations and in this mobilization, because otherwise change is not possible.
Thank you so much. And as a follow-up to that advice, can you share how young people can go about building that coalition of voices that is needed to catalyst that larger national level change?
I think it's the result of connecting intergenerational conversations. For example, there's no way young women in Colombia could have accomplished the inclusion of the gender-based violence in these conversations without decades of work from older feminists who brought this issue to light. So for us, it was a matter of building up on previous wins and to also understand how strategically we should move in this new perspective, how you take opportunities to bring these issues to light within having diverse voices and having many concerns in such a complex way, for example, like a negotiation of a peace process. So it comes to terms of how do you build from previous accomplishments, how do you understand how that history can help you go through it, and what's new that you can bring to the table, what are the new ideas, the next steps. For example, there wouldn't be a way to bring the conversation on reproductive violence without decades of work from other feminists documenting sexual violence. In Colombia, it wasn't like a conversation 40, 50 years ago, but it was thanks to the feminist movement who documented it, who bring that attention to that build the conditions for us to say, wait, there's another category of violence that also occurred, and to build from that. So I think it's a matter of understanding what you can build from, and also what's new that is needed to bring to the table. And those ideas, I think, come definitely from young movements, because there's no other way that new and refreshing ideas come to this conversation.
Get us to this point. Thank you so much. So in continuing in that theme of education and teaching young people, Amos, can you share, in creating the Uganda Unites Peace Club's curriculum, what strategies have you identified as most effective in teaching young people conflict resolution skills? And are there any specific stories of teaching young people that stand out to you?
I think one of the most important things about coming up with a curriculum was, and again, I'll speak to it, and Claire did mention this when she was speaking earlier. A lot of the times when we are talking about engaging young people, it's just to tick a box. And we were trying to be very clear about the fact that when we say we are a youth-led movement, that we are actually youth-led. And so we put together we have what we call a national committee, a team of young people that represent the diversity of religion that we have in the country, but also that represent the diversity that we have in ethnic group. To bring them into the same space and say, what is the situation like? Not urban dwelling young people, but people who are actually from the communities that we're talking about. For them to be able to speak into the development of the content that we were going to disseminate within their community, because that was very important for them to be part of the process of developing this. And while developing it, our goal was to make the peace building something that young people could experience and not just study in a space and live with. So we focused a lot on the experience, for them to be able to interact and have practical meaning out of them engaging. So we use a lot of, in the curriculum, we use a lot of storytelling, but also they do quite a bit of role play and them being able to look at different scenarios that have happened in the past and how they would have gone about them if they were the ones that that were in charge. For example, something similar to what you call model UN, like if you were the one that was in that space and you were doing that, how would you go about that? So they get into scenarios of dialogue, teamwork, reflection on different scenes, for them to be able to do that. And we're very intentional about the curriculum being able to bring people who have different diverse opinions into the same space so that they would still have that opportunity to express themselves the way that they want to express themselves, but then teach them how to be able to accept divergent views, for them to be then able to take those views and say, how do I listen to someone and take what they're saying without being offended, but then be able to understand it from their perspective to be able to take it forward. So we wanted them to do that. But also part of that aspect was that we wanted the young people to own the process. We didn't want it to feel like a top to bottom kind of thing, that this is it, if you don't do it this way, it doesn't work. So what we call the guidebook that is then used in the peace clubs, and peace clubs, to paint a better picture, is a space where, in a high school, where young people meet once a week to talk about different things, and they have a book, which is the guidebook, the curriculum, that they follow for 30 credits. And while they're doing this, it is not us teaching. We've given them the tool, and they are doing the exercises within it, and it's one of them that is facilitating the conversation. We have somebody in the room who is somebody that they can fall back to and who can engage, but ideally for us to see how they're engaging with the content and how they're building on that. And for us, it's very important that then, for example, some of the things that come out of that curriculum is that they go out in community and are able to identify issues that are affecting their community that would otherwise lead to conflict. And then working together, irrespective of tribe or religion, to address that issue. And that means that then they're taking some of the skills that they have gotten through the curriculum and now applying them. They have to organize the community. They now have to think about bridging the gap between the old and their generation to bring people together and understand that there is actually an issue. And what do you think? And being able to listen to everyone's view about how do you think we should go about it, and then offering their opinion on how they think they should go about it, and then being then able to lead the process of them being able to do that. And that's very empowering for them, to be able to see that they can actually be part of a solution that is affecting a community or their school at a very early age. And they carry these lessons into different spaces. An example that I would like to, that I share, is of a young lady who came to our program as an intern. A requirement for the university is for them to go and work with an organization that is making a difference in society, and so to learn from them. And so initially it was just for academic credit for her. Let me come, do this thing, get my academic credit and leave. But then when she got into it, she started to actually really enjoy it. And so at the end of the internship, she said, hey, can I stay and volunteer? And so she stayed and volunteered, and what was supposed to be a couple of months became a year. And at the end of her time of volunteering, she was like, I'm leaving here, but I'm not leaving here to just go on because I feel like I have done my part, but it's because now I want to go and start something that I feel will make a difference in community. And what she was going to do is, she comes from the northern part of the country that I mentioned, where I was doing some work. And when the people who are facing conflict in the northern part of the country would come and settle in the central part of our country, they would face a lot of ridicule, and people didn't feel like they belonged in the space. And so she grew up in a space where she couldn't even speak a local language freely, because if she spoke it, then everybody would look at her in a bad way. They didn't want her to be part of the other kids to play with, or be part of a classroom. And she gives the example of being in a classroom where the teacher told them that everyone who is from the south can easily pass, but you from the north, you have to work harder, not because they lost years in education, but because of how the teacher felt about them and them not belonging. So she grew up in a space where she received a lot of resentment for belonging to a certain group of people. But when it came to it at the end of the time with us, she started a program. She had noticed that kids in the community where she was studying, so many kids would not go to school. And would be playing and would not be attending class, and she was constantly bothered at the fact that people didn't go, those kids were not going to school. And so she reached out, went and talked to some of the kids, and then asked them which school they went to, and then went to the school and asked them why the kids were not staying in school. And so the head teacher tells her that they were not in school because the parents couldn't afford to provide the scholastic materials, and they couldn't afford to stay in school because they couldn't afford the fees that they needed to pay. Now, she then thought that she could come up with a solution. And this is something that we, through the program, are trying to make sure that the young people can identify. So she organized a group of her friends from different ethnicities, different religion, and told them about this problem. So they went, dug deeper, and started to think about solutions. They organized and raised funds to be able to send the kids back to school, but not only that, to provide all scholastic materials they needed to be able to stay in school. But the unique thing about this story is that she wasn't doing it in her community where she was coming from. She was doing it in a community that didn't want her to be in that community. She was doing it for the kids in that community where they were not of her kin, they were not of her tribe. But she felt that if they got the positiveness and they stayed in school and they got the love that she wasn't receiving, then they would reciprocate that many years to come. And she's done that. It's been over 5 years since she started that, and she's been doing it, and over 150 kids have gone through her program. She named it after her mom, who was affected by the conflict. And stories like that keep us going, because then we see that if we engage the young people when they're still young, and we can, at the point when their minds are still yearning for purpose, and they are looking for a way to impact community and get other people to join them, then that is the best way to get it started. And we believe that it might not be realized now, but in years to come, we will see young people working more together and building safer and peaceful communities.
Thank you so much for sharing. I feel as though many of us in peace-building efforts, we hear and we see all kinds of stories of tragedy. So hearing stories of success and of people participating in Uganda Unites, going on to make change in their own communities and communities they're not originally from, and having a positive impact is really exciting for all of us to hear about. When you were first starting the program, did you experience any pushback from local leaders or community members because of your priority on including so many people from various ethnic, religious, or tribal backgrounds?
Yes. One of the two aspects of pushback that you get. One, Uganda is a predominantly young nation. More than 80% of the population is below the age of 35. So when you're engaging a community of young people of that age, you're getting first immediate pushback is from the government itself, because you're organizing young people. And with a government that has been in power for 40 years plus, they're already seeing this as maybe you trying to organize against them. And it was very critical for us from the onset to show every stakeholder who was going to be involved in this, that it was not about who was right, and that everybody was welcome to the table. So we took ourselves to the government and told it that, yes, we know that you're looking into us, but this is why we're doing what we're doing. We believe we can build a better country. If these young people are radicalized by groups that feel that the only way to change the government is through violence, then it affects you, it affects us, it affects everybody. But if we teach them a better way to engage in society, then without violence means, then we're building a safer space. They might not agree with what your beliefs are, but that doesn't mean that we can't share the same table and can't have dialogue. So we are very clear on the fact that we are non-partisan. We're very clear on the fact that we're welcoming of all religions. We're very clear on welcoming all political parties and all ethnicities. So, of course, people, in some instances, people even from the opposing side are saying, but why are the government people on the table? They don't deserve to be on the table. They've done so many atrocities and things like that, but it is important that they are on the table because they are key players in all of this, and they have a role to play in seeing that transition, in maintaining the peace, and for us to see us build. But also there is pushback at the grassroots level. So you go into, for example, a space where you're engaging a school, and you go to a school, say, that is of a certain religion, and you get pushback from the leaders of the school because some of the people that you're bringing into the space to speak are young people sharing their story of a Christian and Muslim that are now best of friends and are working together, and they don't want to be able to show that. They're saying, no, we are for this particular religion. We don't want for you to push that. And we have come to learn that it is important to not become aggressive against people who are giving us aggression. And so what we do, on the other hand, is invite them to separate meetings. So we will say, we are reviewing our curriculum. Could you come and help us see how best to improve it? And invite them to a meeting like this one and present what the curriculum looks like and tell them, okay, so what do you think would be the best way to change things to make them better? And once they see themselves as part of the process, then they are very welcoming for you to be like, I actually, a lot of the sentiments we then get is, I actually didn't know that this program was this deep. I think it is very good for our students. Can you come? Even with these improvements you've made, I think, even before the improvements, I think it was still very good. And then now they're the ones opening the door for us, as opposed to us trying to push for them to open the door. So being able to constantly be able to bring people into a space where they are actually involved in feeding into the process creates that aspect of them feeling that they own the process and it's not just you throwing things at them. And a lot of the time they will open up spaces, and what seemed like pushback now becomes a partnership for you to build forward.
And we'll have one final question from me before we move to our audience questions for all three of you. The last question here is, what helps you maintain your commitment to your goals and your optimism when you face setbacks in peace building? If, Alana, you care to start?
Okay. Yeah, it's a difficult question, but I think that people help me to move forward because a lot of inspiring cases and challenging cases there are in Belarusian diaspora, and a lot of people who suffered from repressions and were political prisoners. They told us their stories and tell us their stories, and I'm learning a lot because of their stories, because of their experience, and it's very important to hear the stories because of we need to understand how to prevent hatred, how to prevent different kinds of discrimination, also how to prevent repression in our country and polarization in Belarus. So for me it's very important to learn from these people, to listen to them, and to understand that sometimes I need to do step back to understand that to remind me why I'm doing there, why I'm here, and to find new ways to prevent all of these things and to solve the conflict in our society. Also, I think curiosity is the key, because a lot of people have different views and values in our society and also in yours, and it's very interesting to learn from them and to understand that you not be able to like them, but you can learn from them and understand how to engage this knowledge in preventing of conflicts and different difficult situations. So I think the key is people, their stories, and the reflection on their stories, and trying not to do bad things because of we want, you know, to help them, but we need to listen people and ask them what do they need, because sometimes we come to people who are affected by violence and by repression and tell, okay, we have some, you know, aid and we will give you, but sometimes people need to be heard, and you need to, you know, do something that they truly need it. So it's also key for me, step back, as I said, and to think about why we are doing that and what we can also offer to these people, and ask them a lot and learning from their experience.
Evolving your mission based off of input from the people you're actually trying to help. Is that wonderful? Thank you. And Christina?
There you go. Well, in Colombia, we face highly organized opposition groups that resist the implementation of the peace agreement. These groups, for example, have significant resources and have achieved notable successes. For example, they won the plebiscite in 2016 by a really narrow margin, voting no for peace, which for us it was crazy for us to think someone saying no to peace, but that happened. And during such difficult moments, I think for us it was maintaining focus on what truly matters and what unites us. In Colombia's case, for example, the priority was bringing together various movements, despite all the difference and the divergent opinions on how to approach certain issues, and advocate collectively for the common objective, which was peace. These massive mobilizations in favor of the peace agreement, with extraordinarily high participation from young people, both in the capital and both throughout the regions in Colombia, were definitely decisive to create favorable conditions for a congressional approval of the peace agreement. Just after this plebiscite. Without that mobilization, the current scenario of implementation wouldn't be possible at all. And we believe also in another example, for example, when we were advocating for decriminalization of abortion, who actually involved several young leaders, young women leaders also. There was a critical moment when we were we had information that we have secured the majority of the judges to win. And in that moment, the opposition group was able to recuse a judge whose vote was essential for achieving the majority. And it delayed the court decisions for several months after that happened. Rather than showing disappointment or frustration as leaders of the Causa Justa movement and many young women involved in that process, we sent a message of unity and hope. We started to say we need everyone to go to the streets, to start calling the Constitutional Court, for everyone to understand the importance of making a swift decision and in favor of women's rights. During that waiting period, actually we knew the case of one woman who tragically died after having an unsafe abortion. So for us, it became a matter of honor her memory by making her case visible in every demonstration, to tell the cost for the Constitutional Court, like this is the cost of you delaying the decision, and it's an urgent matter. And thanks to that mobilization, we had a favorable ruling in February of 2022. So for us, it's a matter of remembering the big goal, the big objective, and finding the way to go against all the differences to go for that goal. And for example, now after these wins, for us it's also a matter of building a network of collaboration with local organizations. Every time that we see setbacks on the implementation, we've come to several answers through knowing local organizations who are really committed to the implementations. We're now working with 3 local organizations in Nariño, which is my home department where I grew up, and I grew up close to the dynamics of war and witnessed all their impacts. Also in Cauca, another territory deeply marked by violence, and Catatumbo, which is in the north of Santander, which is also one of the most complex regions. And we have there women, young women organizations who lead the implementation locally, and we are constantly working with them, seeing how we as an international organization can bring answers from our perspective, and also learning from them to understand how every action that we took could help them in their own goals. So we think that these collaborations also bring a lot of answers in these difficult moments, because it's through uniting the objective and understanding the other's concerns that we build in those specific moments. Yeah.
Facts. The movement's, all right, we'll try this again. The movement's ability to confront setbacks, not with defeatism, but with more coalition building and more outreach, is truly an inspiring effort that all of you have put together. So thank you. And Amos, if you care to close.
To be honest, when you think about the last couple of years, and you see how so many parts of the different continents are all in conflict, it can be very demoralizing for anybody who is involved in peace building. Peace building is like a calling that tests your patience and resilience every single day. You are, there are times when the progress is really slow and you do not see yourself moving anywhere. And when communities relapse, like how we've seen conflict reimagine places where we had thought that it is ended, and where hope is really fragile. And so for us to be able to, at least for myself, to be able to stay in doing this, and I was sharing with the students yesterday that I met, that there was a time when I asked a friend who does other development work, not peace building work, he's in education, and I was asking, why do we keep putting ourselves out there to do this thing? Isn't doing the same thing over and over again and ending up with the same result madness? And he said, well, if you look at every movement that made a difference, none of them ever realized the difference in their time, but they kept going and believing, and they had hope that something would change, ultimately change. Mindsets would change, people would change, hearts would change. And so you keep at doing the things you're doing because of the small wins that you make. Because with every small win is a brick that you've added to this humongous building of peace that you're trying to put together. And then there is the remembrance that it is not just you. So it's not a lone Amos in Uganda building peace for the entire world. It is so many young people in this room, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Palestine, in Israel, in Russia, in Ukraine, in the US, that are putting a small brick that would ultimately, in the end, see peace to a certain degree, in a certain form, in a certain place that changes. So for me to see young people like the story I shared of Ioannita, who then made a difference in a community, that is a huge win for me. I could get that win for an entire month, and it would keep me fired up and ready to go each for countless months, because I can see that in one person there are about another 100 lives that have been changed. And if that can only be true for many other people, then we can see that change happen for many parts of the world and in very many spaces. So it is just remaining consistent, having the courage to believe that that change can come, and being grounded enough to put certain people around you that will, for the longest time, constantly be that person that whispers in your ear and gives you that encouragement that you can still go at it, and remind you of the small wins, and show you that some of these things are important. And one of the ways we do that is, I belong to a bigger group. So Uganda Unites is not just solo Uganda Unites. So we've been able to, through inspiration from other young people, we've seen young people start their own Unites movements in other countries. And then we belong to an umbrella group that is Global Unites. And we meet regularly. Actually, we do meet every month just to talk about what's going on in our individual countries, and what's going on and how you're able to make the peace happen. So young people in Congo are giving us updates on what's going on in the peace situation in Congo. And we're speaking into the challenges they're having and seeing how to support them, maybe give them resources, or trying to see how we can support. And feeding off of each other and being to do that, they say, as iron sharpens iron. So you're able to grow and be able to actively keep plugged in, because you know that you're not going through this alone, but even in doing so, where it feels lonely many times, you know that somebody else out there is also putting the work in. And at some point you will have to pass the baton to somebody else. And your prayer is that everybody that you've mentored to come after you will be able to just innovate and do more than what you were able to do, and build a much safer world.
Thank you. I especially appreciate the analogy as peace is something that we're all building, and as a literal building that we're constructing together, and the value of that global community that we've brought together somewhat today. Thank you all for your insights and your experiences and your continued work. We'll move now towards a few audience questions. If anyone has a question, we'll try and get you a mic.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. My name is Alex. My question is for Amos. You mentioned briefly that the idea of a community going back into conflict is like relapse. And as someone who has experienced and been in communities with those who are struggling with addictions, I think that's a very potent metaphor. And so I'm curious if you believe that the communities going back into relapse is a type of insanity, or if it is more the weakest form of sanity to not see other futures, and how you get people to see other futures, and if you offer some parallels to what it looks like to come back to a sobriety of a type of peace.
Thank you, Alex, for the question. And I think Claire did speak to this in a way. Some of the pain and that people who go through conflict face is deeper than just what a peace agreement can fix, or sitting them in a classroom can change. They have lost a loved one, they have lost property, and so it takes much more than just certain ideals that you're trying to instill for them to change. So you could get a young man from thinking about revenge to trying to build peace, and then like Claire was saying, the state is actually doing the opposite. And so the question to them is, why am I being the bigger person here? Why do I have to be the one to be the one to push for the peace while the other person, the aggressor, continues to do it? And the thing is, even during relapse, it is constantly being able to show them that there is still a better path, and being able to show them that there's, and again, Claire mentioned this yesterday, that there's not been any result that came out of violence that actually led to peace. And so in them seeking revenge or being able to go back to thinking that if they attacked and that they would get the healing that they need and that things would then be better, would never happen. And then they're able to see that if an eye for an eye only makes us blind, and for us to be then able to show them that it takes time and patience. So you're not going to expect the young person or to change in a week. It could take 2 years, 3 years. It could seem like they've changed after 5 years and then something changes, but it is you continuously engaging and showing them that there is a better option to them picking up a gun or them picking violence as the option.
Hi, Nariman Safavi. I'm an average citizen of Chicago area. I'm thinking that the youth of any society are symbolically the future of that society. And that is a strategic asset in gaining moral high ground and getting some sort of a buy-in from all the different sides of a conflict. Shouldn't that be the first principle of organizing such movements? And when I think about the history of this country and the civil rights movement, the key part and the heavy lifting of the civil rights movement was done by an organization called SNCC, SNCCC, Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee. And the thinking of the civil rights movement was that if they lead the demonstrations and the protests, they actually are a better symbol of where the future of America is going to be. And also, if the parents get involved in the demonstration and they get arrested, the home loses a breadwinner, while a student is actually, if they get arrested, the parents can come and bail them out. At the same time as you get symbolic value, it also is a strategic asset. Is this kind of a thinking going on in the movements that you're involved with?
There you go. Well, I actually do not believe that, for example, in Colombia, that was think in that way. For a couple of reasons. I think the first one is, yes, definitely there's this idea of young movements as the future, but actually in Colombia, it feels a lot like the present. It's not like we're thinking ahead, it's that young women and men are already involved in the discussions and in the mobilization and in the negotiations. And they build their way through that to be present in that moment. So I believe that actually is a little bit, you could call organic, because once you grew up in a place who's deeply affected by conflict, you might have several possibilities, maybe be displaced, maybe if you are privileged enough, not knowing about it and ignoring it, especially if you're in a big city, you don't feel like you are living in a country affected by armed conflict. But in many cases, that also leads to, I need to do something about this and to be involved in all the mobilizations, in for example, in academia, on the discussions, and also in organizations. We have a really strong civil society like organizations, because many people think this is the way we can make a change. And I don't want, for example, one of the first slogans of young women in Colombia mobilizing for peace, it was, I'm not having children for war. I'm not having children for them to go into war. So that's how, for example, the reproductive rights movement came along with the peace movement. Because how do I use my autonomy if this country won't leave us an opportunity to build a life as we want? So for me, I don't think it was this strategic thinking that involved young women in the movement. We were already there because it was something that crossed our entire lives, our entire experiences, and we wanted to do something about it. And we weren't thinking on the future, we were thinking on the present, because we need to change it. That was at least my experience in Colombia.
Yeah, no, as you know, maybe Belarus is a dictatorship, and inside country, there are organizations, but mostly NGOs and civil society destroyed after the protests of 2020, after the presidential elections, and young people had to leave country because of the engagement in the protests in 2020. And a lot of people inside country now, young people, I mean, they're very controlled at the universities, at the schools, in different kinds of organizations. They don't have opportunities to, think big and to build new movements, because all of these movements will be recognized as an extremist or terrorist organizations by a government of dictator Lukashenko. So it's very hard inside Belarus now to think about peace building and to understand how to prevent violence and how forgive maybe people who repressed your beloved ones, repressed your family, you, someone who you know. And but I know that young people trying to also find solutions and trying to speak with their families, with their parents, and also they go to abroad and trying to study abroad, also to understand how different countries prevent violence and repressions, and share also the case of Belarus. To understand how to build the future in our country, democratic future, I mean. But it's also very complicated because of the regime and repressions on the people. So diaspora in different countries, is more than 600,000 people left Belarus and after 2020. And they're living abroad, and of course young people who were repressed and moved to different countries, they're trying to build communities and networks. We have also organization Youth Caucus within the Coordination Council where I work. We are trying to protect youth rights and trying to find the solutions to how to get visas also for Belarusians, how to also, to help them have some educational documents to educate abroad and different other stuff that it's very meaningful for young people abroad, because Belarusians don't have rights, and we even having the opportunity to renew our passport at the embassies, you know, to have some certificates, educational, birth, other certificates at the embassies. So young people, of course, they felt, you know, illegal because they're banned in their country, and they're also banned sometimes in the countries, European countries where they live. So it's very hard for them, but we're trying to build this network, supported network, and trying to I mean civil society and different organizations trying to find the ways how to educate them, to organize different events about peace building, about preventing conflicts, about how to also educate informally and others different important stuff. So we keep going, but for us, for Belarusians, it's very difficult on the context of our country and our living abroad.
Problem?
Yes.
Any brief response
Yes.
for this, and we'll get everyone to lunch.
I was just going to add that sometimes the context is different. For example, in Uganda, the young people really want to get involved, but people feel, much older generation feels that, or they are already involved and actually engaging. But the much older generation feels they are very idealistic. And so they are pushing the buttons so much. And when you're in a country where there's been different cycles of violence, there's a certain age group or a certain generation that feels like maybe this semblance of peace should not be tampered with. I think they start to get comfortable with that idea of what looks like peace. And a lot of the time, that's what is happening, for example, in Uganda. When young people are trying to really engage and make that difference, they're constantly reminded by their parents that you never experienced war, you do not know what war is like and what loss looks like, and can you not push the buttons? And but the young people, their definition of peace is different from the definition of the older generation. So the question usually for me to the older generation is, these young people are ready to actually lead, but are you ready to let them actually take the space to lead you into what they are envisioning as the new direction for wherever we need to be? Take, for example, in Kenya, which is slightly different. When this year, when the young people, the Gen Z movement took to the streets, a lot of the parents understood why they were taking to the streets. And the parents would drive their children to the streets and then continue to work, because they understood what the children were actually taking to the streets for. And they believed that if they continued engaging, the government could actually heed and listen to them. And that's what eventually happened. There was listening. But again, the fear of some parents came true, that they lost their children in those protests. But at the end of the day, different contexts bring out different situations. Kenya has not had the level of conflict that Uganda has had. So for them, the parents understand what a movement can do, what protest means, and they know that their laws are enshrined in a way that to a certain degree their children will be safe. But for Uganda, the parents are not sure that what seems like peace currently is something that can hold if the young people took to protest and do that. So sometimes it's the difference in context.
If everyone could please join me in thanking our amazing speakers for their insights today.
So I have some questions to start about with you, and then some questions of political analysis, and then some questions about sort of your words for us. So Nadia, you've told your story to audiences around the world, and in The Last Girl, the absolutely amazing book, The Last Girl, you write, "It never gets any easier. Each time you tell your story, you relive it." But you also write, "Still, my story is the best weapon I have against terrorism." So I share those words so all of us here can know the significance of what it means for you and for other survivors to share your stories. So in that context, could you tell us whatever you'd like to share about who you are, your captivity by ISIS, how you escaped, and how you became an activist? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, this one's working. I am really grateful for the opportunity to share my work and my story with all of you. My story began long before I knew that ISIS existed in the small village of Kojo in northern Iraq. And I was raised by a single mother as the youngest of 11 children. I had dreams of finishing high school as the first one in my family and opening a beauty salon in my village. But as I was preparing to enter my final year of high school, ISIS invaded my village of Kojo as a part of their systematic attack on the Yazidi community, a religious minority in Iraq. And that day, I was, taken, not the exact day, because ISIS took most of my, my region, Sinjar, before they came to Kojo. We were surrounded actually by ISIS for 2 weeks in my village. And in those 2 weeks, we called the world, and we were able to use our phones and say that ISIS are, they've surrounded our village, and we were more than 1,700 people of Kojo. And as I watched for 2 weeks as my brothers were trying their best to get their pregnant wives out of the village, their daughters, their sisters, their mother, but no one came to help us. And ISIS ordered us all to go to the primary village of school of the village, and then separated. Almost the entire male population was murdered in less than 2 hours, including 6 of my brothers, and we, women and children and elderly, were taken into different places. But in the next day, my mother, alongside her sister, 2 nieces, and 1 nephew, were killed in one mass grave. And women and girls were taken into markets as the world watched that ISIS genocide was not something that they tried to hide or anything. It was very public, and they were very proud, and they used social media's platform like Telegram, YouTube, Facebook. They had their own language, publication, which was also in English, Dabel is it called, and they published everything, their plans and their what they were doing to Yazidis and others in Iraq and Syria on Dabel, but also use social media. And I was just one of more than 6,000 women and girls who were taken into sexual slavery. And ISIS opened markets in Raqqa and in Mosul, and there they distributed women and girls to fighters. But as I have shared in this book, that we share our stories at great personal cost, because no one wants to talk about rape over and over again. And as I was on my way to safety when I escaped, I thought that I will never look back at Mosul. I will never try to remember the faces and the names and the people who looked away, people who turned us in. But when you survive something like that and you know that you have loved ones still there and friends, I immediately felt that my survival carried with it a responsibility to share with the world my story. And yes, I came from a country and a community where talking about rape is a really big thing. And I grew up with a lot of stories of honor killings in all around Iraq. And we never talked about, sex and rape. It's stigmatized. And I was very aware of that. But I couldn't just talk about what ISIS did to the men who they killed them in mass graves, or how they trained boys into, in the training camps and turned them into, brainwashed them and turned them into fighters. I needed to share what ISIS was, their plan for women and girls. But I grew up in a small village where I really didn't know that the UN existed. I never met a journalist before I made it to the camps. I didn't know about the international community. I only knew who was like the president or prime minister of my country. In smaller, remote villages, you are isolated, and we didn't have information. Yes, I went to school, but even the materials that we read were picked by the government, what to read and what not to. So everything was new to me, and I had nothing but my story. And yes, I shared my story with the 60 Minutes the first time I covered my face. I told them that I needed to cover my face because I had loved ones in captivity and I was in a displacement camp without the basic privacy. And I shared my face, and the moment I left the interview, I just realized that, that voice and that story needed a face too. And I have been using that story as my only weapon to fight back and to make sure that I will be the last girl in the world with a story like mine.
In telling your story, you've also listened to so many women tell their stories, and have thought deeply about what it means to collect stories. So in that context, can you tell us about the Murad Code and the important principles that you've helped develop and think about for anyone who's interested in documenting or investigating or researching survivors of conflict in general and survivors of conflict-related sexual violence in particular?
Look, a lot of people, even those who have good intentions to go and document rape as a weapon of war, sometimes they don't know how to approach a survivor. And it's a very sensitive topic, right? I remember when we were in the camps, and there were so many people, journalists, aid workers, a lot of people that we, as I said at the beginning, that I really didn't know the difference between a journalist and an aid worker. And a lot of them would just take our stories and our photos, and sometimes we will say, don't share my face, but the next day you see it on social media. We will sign on documents that were not in our language. And a lot of girls and women stopped sharing their stories after their faces were shared over and over again, and their information. And it was hard for many of them. Almost every female member of my family was taken into captivity and raped, and 11 years later, none of them have shared their stories. And their stories are even more difficult than mine, but they have decided not to, and I respect that. I know that in many cultures, in many parts of the world, sometimes silence is their only way of protecting themselves from shame and stigma that came with, with sharing your stories, and there are consequences. But it was difficult for many. And generations of people before me never went to school. My sisters never went to school, and they didn't know what they were signing on. So after I moved to Germany, and then I started learning how common rape as a weapon of war is, and it's been. At the beginning, I thought it was just to me and my community, but then as I traveled the world and met survivors from Congo to Sudan to Colombia and Ukraine and everywhere in between, I realized that it's been used as a weapon of war for so long. And as I was sharing my story with survivors, survivors would share their stories, men and women. And we had really different experiences, but one thing we had in common was how we were treated after we were raped. And it was very common that we were taken advantage of, that our stories were taken by people we didn't know if they use it or not, how they use it, or they would just use it the way they wanted. But also a lot of people came every single day with their own list of questions, that you only tell me how you felt the second you were raped. But if you add something else to it, it's not interesting. You have to say what you were wearing, how you felt, right? And no human being should go through that 4 or 5 times a day. And as we were working on the Murad Code, which more than 1,000 survivors, men and women, participated in the code, I remember some of them, one of them said that she shared her story 26 times one day. And everyone who interviewed her wanted their own, they had their own questions and wanted to ask her. But that's not healthy, and that is why a lot of women and girls refuse to share their stories at the very beginning. And with the Murad Code I'm so proud of it because we were able to change it for many survivors. And it's really easy. It's just 10 principles for anyone who is willing to go and investigate and document this crime. It's not 100 pages where you don't have time. On your way to the interview, you can just take 15 minutes to prepare yourself for the interview, to know about that person as a whole and not just as a story. And it's been really successful. I remember when I was in Ukraine 2 years ago, and it's been translated to their language, and there are so many Ukrainian women who have been raped and during this ongoing war, and they printed on cards, and they were holding the cards, and anyone who approached them, they will just go through the cards first to know their rights. And if they want to say no, that is also okay.
Incredible lessons for anyone working in spaces related to conflict. So to move now to some other thinkings, analysis about conflict and peace. Genocide, which some have called the crime of crimes, thinking as the destruction of a nation or an ethnic group. More than 150 states are party to the UN's 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Yet even in the 21st century, genocides continue. What do you believe are the lessons that the international community must learn from the Yazidi genocide, and what prevents the world from acting to stop these crimes?
The Yazidi genocide, unfortunately was not the first and it's not the last. Since 2014, many other genocides have taken place from, around the world, and we continue to fail the international community and those who said never again, and they continue to watch, and it happens over and over again. It is important to know that for example, in the Yazidi genocide, there were clear signs, as there are always, when genocide is about to take place. In the Yazidi genocide, we were watching ISIS as they were coming. ISIS said in their pamphlet that Yazidis were infidels and that they needed to eradicate them, their women being taken and the religion to be wiped out from the earth. But there were, as I said, they were on social media. This was not a long time ago, it was a decade ago. They recruited people from all around the world. How did these people, men and women, went to Iraq and Syria and committed crimes against humanity? They went because they were seeing them on social media, they connect with them, so they use that. And at the same time, it's that when our village was surrounded by ISIS for 2 weeks, my now husband was in America. He moved to the US in 2010, and I didn't know him, and I learned this, long after I met him. The day, the weeks that we were surrounded, he was protesting in DC, and he was saying that Kojo is being surrounded, and he was actually talking to the leader of our village. And the leader was telling him, they have given us 3 days, we either convert or they will kill us. They're taking women, they're saying that they will, rape the women and take the children. And no one, even our own government, they didn't try a single time to rescue 1,700 people. So it is, sometimes they will try to say that, we didn't know it was going to happen. No, there are always clear signs. But also, let's look at who is, sometimes people think that, oh, those like ISIS are just some individuals or, prisoners or, small groups. But no, these were people with high education, really, doctors, teachers, engineers, but who also funded these, crimes. We have filed a lawsuit in the US against a French cement company with my lawyer, Mal Cloney. It's called Lafarge. Lafarge funded ISIS in Syria for, gave them millions of euros for over a year. And we have documents as ISIS was using that specific money and buying and selling Yazidi women. So it is important to look at why for an entire year the Europeans or the international community didn't ask Lafarge, why are you still operating in Syria and paying ISIS, right? And now we have a good case, but it's taking forever. So it's never happens in a vacuum. There are always signs, and unfortunately, the prevention requires political will, and there is no political will. Every time you go to them, I share my story and other stories, and they're well aware of the stories. They're well aware of what is needed to prevent such atrocities in the future, but there is no political will. And even after, for example, we have had, just yesterday, I gave my testimony in a Belgium court alongside 2 other survivors who a Belgian citizen went all the way to Syria and bought all these Yazidi girls and raped them and sold them and bought them again. And this was a foreign, fighters who went and believed in that ideology and joined them. And still we are sharing more and more. And in the documents, his own mother sent him more than 60,000 euros while he was doing these crimes in Belgium, right? So it was very clear, and who was going and who was funding that, and who was who were the victims. And we are still trying to convince the Belgian system and everything that this person was a criminal.
Words about going to the courts is a nice segue to a question from Liana, one of the student organizers from today's symposium, who notes that in your Nobel speech, you really emphasized the need for justice, and it's something you've talked about repeatedly, and justice against ISIS perpetrators. So Liana thought that in some conflicts, victims are asked to reconcile before justice is delivered, or maybe even in place of justice. So in your view, why is justice such an important part of peace? And are there any thoughts you have about the sorts of mechanisms or approaches that have been most successful in delivering justice to victims and survivors of war crimes, or maybe approaches that fall short in delivering justice?
Survivors are told everything. They're told, oh, forgive, you will heal. Or forget, you will do better, or just, move on. And they always are, we are presented with these, solutions that they really don't work for us. And for me, when I met Amal Clooney, I was looking for an alternative to revenge. I grew up in a region when it's always revenge, unfortunately. In my country, it's been dealing with war and terrorism and conflicts for over, for decades now, and many countries in the region. But what we didn't here growing up was like justice for those who suffered, right? It was always revenge, one taking revenge from the others. And for me, it's never going to bring peace to the region or the peoples or to anybody. So I remember talking to her and I said, I don't want my community, I don't want my brothers or anyone to go and do the same, to feel that now they can rebuild their lives. Because if I don't also blame them when you are not taught that there are actually alternatives. You don't have to go and do the same to them. They don't know any better, right? And it is important that we if we want a peaceful, stable Iraq or Middle East, we really need justice and accountability. Those who have committed crimes against not just Yazidis, but all minorities, they need to be held accountable, right? And I didn't know about the International Criminal Court. I didn't know about the justice system. Even the word genocide didn't exist, or conflict-related sexual violence in my dialogue, in my culture. And I had to learn, but for me it was just, I didn't want revenge, I wanted something else. And I had to learn, and I'm learning every single day with the cases we have, whether like individuals like the one in Belgium, or with the women who went and took their children and joined ISIS, or the companies like Lafarge who funded these crimes. It's a whole process for me that I am learning like a kid in school every single day. But I know that it is bringing hope really to people that I know, that there is actually an alternative and people can live together. If Iraq is being able, Iraq, unfortunately, to date, we have not had any cases against ISIS. They just charge individuals as, members of a terrorist organizations, but not based of, crimes against humanity or rape. And it's very different. So we have had a few cases in Germany, in Sweden, where, survivors were a part of the whole process, and they were at the court, and Germany really led the way for others to do the same. But I always say, then I have lost more members of my own family to ISIS than the number of ISIS members who have been held accountable. So we're very far away from, that. But every time we have a case, it really gives communities and survivors hope that this, those individuals will be punished, will be charged, and it's my mission, it's my focus, and I was lucky to really meet, smart lawyers and individuals who have been helping us, because you can't do it alone. You just have the testimonies and evidence, and then it's up to them what to decide.
To achieve sustainable peace, we must also understand the long-term effects of violence, some of which you've been talking about now. So it's now been more than 11 years since the start of ISIS's genocide of the Yazidi people, more than 6 years since the military defeat of the so-called Islamic State. What do you see today as the enduring consequences of these atrocities for the Yazidi people? And what do you think are the most important steps needed to address these ongoing legacies of conflict and violence?
Yes, it has been 6 years since ISIS has been defeated, but 11 years later since the genocide, and as I speak to all of you, I'm just one story here and one person who still has a niece, a nephew, and a sister-in-law still missing. And for each Yazidi, the answer is different, to be honest. For some who have been displaced in the camps for 11 years, the answer is that they want a dignified life, whether it's in the, outside of Iraq, or to be able to return home and rebuild their lives. For some, others will be, that they want the remains of their loved ones to be identified so they can have some closure. For mothers who still have children in captivity, they want their children back. It is different for each one, because we all have yeah, we were attacked by the same group, but the needs are different. For survivors are different. For those who have returned back to their homelands, it's different. But the most important thing is justice and accountability, because a lot of hundreds of thousands of Yazidis may never be able to leave Iraq, right? Some of them have tried, but they were not able. But at the same time, you have countries like Germany who are sending back refugees, and no country is ready to take them. So for those who are in Iraq, and Iraq is, at the end of the day, we are a part of that country, right? And we need to make sure that Yazidis and other minorities are protected, and to reassure them that what happened in 2014 will not happen again. But if they don't see the Iraqi government taking action, holding perpetrators accountable, and they haven't even recognized the genocide, it's scary, right? These individual cases are important. Helping people to rebuild their lives it's important, but there's so much that it's still, with the 2,800 women and children who are still missing, like, we will wait for them forever. We need them back. My niece was only 4 weeks old. Now she's 11 years old in captivity. And the last time we heard from her mother was 7 years ago. So that is how I feel. I was in Iraq, in August. And 11 years later, the Iraqi government called me and they published a list of names, that remains of individuals who were identified. And 11 years later, I was able to bury 2 of my brothers. But I still, like everyone else, we want to bury our mother. And I had 2 nieces who were my best friends, and we were taken into captivity together. And unfortunately, they ran away so many times, but they were turned into ISIS, and they were both killed in captivity. So it's important for us to have them buried in our homelands. And the answer is very different for each Yazidi.
Move finally to some questions about sort of your thoughts for how each of us can make a contribution to make the world more peaceful and more just. So today's event is part of a year-long series here at the Buffett Institute on the theme Brave New Futures. So part of being brave is feeling fear and mustering the courage to act anyway, as Ilana said this morning in the earlier session. Your book describes moments of both absolute fear and astonishing courage. And I also remember you mentioned very powerfully in the book at one point how it can be difficult when people tell you, oh, you're so brave. So fear and courage are complicated things. So as we move forward with this theme this year on Brave New Futures, is there anything you'd like to share about what bravery means to you or has meant in your own life? And any thoughts about how each of us can cultivate our own capacities to be brave?
Bravery has meant to me that, silent would have been like so much easier, right? When you just don't share it, and what you see, if it's against you or against others. When I moved to Germany, I felt that it was a whole new planet, and I could just leave everything behind. And I was, given an apartment and healthcare and psychological support, and I could have even changed my name and no one would have said, oh, but you were raped. But I couldn't. For me, I needed to find my purpose. And for me also, turning my pain into purpose has helped me. And it is important to know that I was afraid so many times. And being afraid and being, brave doesn't mean that you don't need to be afraid. It's important to have fears while you're also brave. It is important to act when you witness, but also if you don't have to be a victim to fight for justice. You can use your education, your voice, your passion, because those are the tools that can build peace, sustainable peace. And people, do tell me, but I remember writing this book, every night I will just think about what I wanted to share the next day in the book. And there are things that I will never share, and I don't think I owe it to anybody, but at the same time, there were things that I shared that I was constantly thinking of my nieces and nephews who were little, and I said, but one day they will open this book and read about it, because the trauma is generational, and when you read a book like this about your aunt or your sister or your cousin, it is hard. But I had to, it was important to not just write something that it's about rape and rape is being used as a weapon of war, but just to remind the next generation of people that how many women, and men before you had to, go through this. And for many of them, I was in Kosovo, and in Kosovo more than 20 years ago, close to 2,000 people were raped. And so far, only 2 people have publicly shared their stories. And as I was talking to other women who have never shared their faces, they were just crying, and they regret not sharing it, but it was also important for them to protect themselves and their families. So there are so many, I just want you to know that those who share their stories are important and they are brave, but those who don't share it, they're also brave. And they don't share it because they have their own reasons, and their bravery is even more valuable to me because they keep it to themselves. They deal with it every single day, because I share mine with you, and I will go from here to a next place and hope to prevent this from happening. But those who live it, live with it every night, it's one of the most painful things, because I have sisters and nieces and cousins who choose that way of dealing with it.
Final question, related to courage, is another theme in The Last Girl that really impacted me in such a way I don't think I'll ever forget. I read, I stopped, I thought, and read again several times. And that's the question of individual ethical responsibility. So you write so powerfully about the family that took this huge risk to help you escape. But then you also note that for every family like that one, there were thousands more who did nothing. And you say that you try to have compassion for those families who did nothing, but also they had a choice. So what is your message to each of us about the choice to act up against injustice, or what it means when one witnesses injustice, whether near or far, and does not stand up?
That in moment of moral crisis, doing nothing is also a choice. And I am forever grateful to the family that helped me, and because of them, I was able to share this story with the world. And they did it at a really great personal risk. It was risky, but at the same time, for many of them who went and tried to find a similar family, not in a strange, country. This was our own country. These were our own fellow Iraqis, women and men, and they turned them in over and over again until many of them, like my nieces, were killed. But I wanted to think that not all Iraqis were the same. And I think that gave me hope with the family that helped me, that some didn't help because they were afraid, but a lot did help because they believed in that ideology. I will never forget the voice message that we received from my niece in captivity, who found the phone and recorded her time in captivity, as when ISIS were going to outside of the house. And she sent us a voice message, and she said she was with this doctor who was a doctor in Sinjar for decades, treated us as Yazidis and was a well-educated man and joined ISIS, and he took my niece. And for us, it was even more difficult when you know people who have known you. There were so many misinformations about Yazidis that, oh, we were not people of the book, or that, you know, our food was not halal. I mean, I grew up on a farm when people didn't buy our products because of those misinformation. And I'm not saying everyone. We had, you know, amazing friends and from all communities. But I remember how every time we had to rent a family friend who was Muslim to take our products to the Mosul market and say that they were his products. So that's how for decades we sold our products. And unfortunately in Iraq, there's just the education, the government never worked on bringing communities closer together and learning about one another, and that I didn't do anything specific when I was growing onions. You know, it was just like any farmer. But it is important to know that if we want to, for the next, you know, generation and this generation, it is important to not just look away, and we can always start small. I started small when you witness, but even if you don't live in a country like Iraq, can always start small, and it is a choice if we want to be involved or look away, but I hope you don't look away, and I believe that you want.
Thank you for the unforgettable honor of being with us today, and thank you for the questions that were all so powerful and courageous. So we can all now.